There is one moment in Treehouse of Horror 18 that's one of my all time favourite moments in any Simpsons episode, one of my favourite bits of animation ever. And it's going to be the thumbnail for this video because I love looking at it to the point where I watched it in ultra slow motion and I just adore it. But I will talk about that in due course. This is the 5th episode of the 19th season of The Simpsons, directed by Chuck Sheetz and Marc, and as always we have 3 different separate stories as part of Treehouse of Horror, and as always I will talk about the 3 of them. I won't give massive spoilers for any of them, apart from this one moment that I absolutely adore every second of it. It makes me feel sick and I love it. That's the only bit of specific detail that I'll give. I'll be quite vague about everything else so as to not spoil anything. The first one is E.T. Go Home, which involves Kodos, who is in The Simpsons' backyard, and Bart finds Kodos, and then Lisa does, and they try and protect Kodos from humanity. And it was really boring. I'm not the biggest fan of Kodos and Kang anyway. I don't dislike them, I'm just not that bothered about them, but I didn't really care for it. I also noticed that Kodos really sounded like Homer in this episode. Obviously they're both voiced by Dan Castellaneta, but I've never noticed that before. I've never looked at Kodos and pictured Homer. And I don't know if it's just this episode or if it's just the first time I'm noticing it, but it definitely seemed to be like the voice was a little bit too Homer for my liking. The second story is okay. It's Mr. and Mrs. Simpson, obviously a parody of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Because I'd seen Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I could, draw on the source material and it was a little bit interesting. It's also very well animated when they're both, Marge and Homer are both basically blasting up the house. That I thought was great. The way the walls crumbled and the roof, the ceilings and things were obliterated. Visually, it was very effective. The narrative, not that interesting. As I said, because I've seen Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I can, make connections. But had I never seen Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I probably wouldn't have liked it at all, really. So they're both quite weak. But then we get the third one, and I love it. It is so beautiful. This is Heck House, and it starts off with Bart, Lisa, Nelson, and Milhouse trick-or-treating. Love their Halloween costumes, had a lot of fun with it, and then they start doing the tricks of trick-or-treat, which I have to say I'm really pleased with the show for that, because when I was younger and trick-or-treated, I think I only went trick-or-treating twice. But occasionally, if we'd knock on the door, we'd say trick or treat, and the clever people who answered the door would say trick. And then at the time, we'd tell a joke or something. But it was only when I grew up that I realised that what it means is, give me a treat or I'll do a trick, not you get to tell me to do a trick. So I was really pleased that the show actually got it the right way around. And they start to take things a little bit too far, and Flanders decides to teach them a lesson by turning the church into a heck house, which is basically where he shows them what hell will be like if they sin. And we get to have a look at the different deadly sins, and the one I love it so much. For gluttony, Homer is eating spaghetti, and then the spaghetti comes out of his body, and it's just gorgeous. It's a kind of trypophilia thing. That's why I love it. And I watched it on 0.07 speed, basically frame by frame, which actually I've never done before with a cartoon, and it's actually really interesting to see, to see the different stages of how things are built up. And I might do it more often with cartoons that I really enjoy, but it was just gorgeous to see it happening in slow motion. It made me feel sick, and it's kind of a trypophilia and trypophobia thing, and I just love it so much, and it's one of my favourite things ever. Absolutely gorgeous. The rest of the cartoon is relatively interesting, but rushed. I felt like it ended kind of abruptly, and not just that I was left wanting more, but I just feel like it just kind of ended, game over, and not in a way where, horror films end suddenly and you're left feeling sick because, the killer wasn't caught or the killer's still at large. It wasn't that kind of abrupt ending. It was just, It was like, did you just chop off a minute or something? Did you run out of time and chop it off? I don't know. I mean, I doubt it. But yeah, so it didn't really feel very good at the end. Honestly, I feel like it's one of the weakest Treehouse of Horrors. Definitely is one of the weakest. But that spaghetti moment, I'm going to have, I don't know if they're going to be nightmares or gorgeous dreams, but it's going to stick with me for a very long time. I definitely recommend you check it out. I just have a Google Chrome like speed thing extension, and I just when I watched it on Disney Plus, I just put it down to 0.07. It was beautiful. Okay, I love the spaghetti moment. Heck House was not a bad episode. Mr. and Mrs. Simpson was okay. E.T. Go Home was kind of rubbish. Treehouse of Horror 18 is not the best. It's kind of weak. But thank you for the spaghetti.